Okay, good evening and welcome once again to Twilight's Thoughts On, the show where Twilight uploads a whole bunch of stuff that then gets lost because Firefox decided to be a bitch and freeze up. So this is the second time I'm trying to upload this video, so forgive me if I sound a little rushed, but I kind of don't like talk about all the stuff I've already just talked about. Anyways, today's topic is Final Fantasy. Basically, I love Final Fantasy. I've always loved Final Fantasy. Even the games that most people don't like, I still enjoy playing. The first game I ever played was Final Fantasy IX, which I loved. Second game I played was Final Fantasy VII, which I also loved, and so on and so forth. Sorry, it's kind of... I already talked about this. I know it's the first time you're hearing it, but it's the second time I'm saying it. So I'm kind of trying to speed through it so I can get to the part which I was trying to do before my Firefox completely froze and I had to restart it. Basically, what do I love about Final Fantasy? Everything. I love the characters, I love the story, the graphics are like amazing. Like Final Fantasy IX, I played and those graphics were like the FMVs. I never knew that was possible to do on a PlayStation. I mean, nowadays it looks old, but then it looked fantastic to me. Like, I was like, whoa, God, it looks so pretty. Yes. Anyway, what don't I like about Final Fantasy? Well, the thing I ranted about in the previous video, which was lost, was random encounters. I have always been very annoyed about random encounters because they kind of discourage you from exploring and investigating places by yourself, which is kind of what these games should be encouraging you to do, not discouraging. If I'm trying to explore and see if there's any hidden items down this side path or whatever, or see if there's maybe something in this room that I can discover, I don't want to have to be beset by enemies every 5 steps while I'm doing that. The earlier games were really bad about that. Like every 5 or 6 steps you were in another battle, and it got really annoying after a while because these dungeons are huge and there's loads to explore. There's loads of little rooms and places to explore, loads of little nooks and crannies to look into to see if you can find anything, and you can't do that if every 5 or so steps you're in another battle which you have to either fight or run away from, and you spend ages just... It's artificial padding is what it is. It's artificially extending the length of playtime because you're getting into battles, and even if you run away you still have to go through a whole battle transition screen. You go into the battle, you wait for the menu to pop up, and then you press L1, R1 and hold them down until your characters do that little running away thing. And they don't need to exist, and they're not a good thing. And I like how the new games did away with those, starting with Final Fantasy 12. Well, not count Final Fantasy 11 because that's an MMORPG, and I think random encounters really don't have any place in an MMORPG. But Final Fantasy 12 had the enemies on the screen that you could run up and attack them, and there wasn't even a separate battle screen. It was just the enemies were just there that you could just run up, hit. Your characters shift into battle mode, yes, but there isn't like a whole screen transition. That didn't happen. You were still on the field. You just had the enemy in front of you. Your characters had their weapons out and they were ready to do some damage. And then you kill the enemy and carry on. And once you kill an enemy, that's it. It doesn't come back unless you leave the area and return. So you can run around and kill all the enemies in an area, and then you've got a whole entire area to explore without the fear of having suddenly and you're in another battle again. I learned to hate that sound that Final Fantasy IX specifically has that. I think is what it sounded like. I forget now, it's been a while, but I learned to really hate that sound because every time that I heard it was like, oh my god, please just leave me alone. I just want to open this treasure chest, or climb this ladder, or go down this corridor, or whatever. I don't want a battle, okay? If I want a battle, I will run around in circles. And if I want to fight and level up, I will run around in circles until I get into a battle, and then level up that way. When I want to explore, I want to explore. I don't want to do both at once. And that's why the newer games are good, because they do away with random encounters and they let you fight when you want and they let you explore when you want. Okay, so that's basically what I think about Final Fantasy. Now I'm going to try and do what I did before and tell you a few interesting bits of information about it. So the first game I want to talk about, well, I'm going to sort of jump from game to game here, because like I said, I do this off the top of my head. It's not scripted. It may sound scripted, but that's just because I say this so often in my head. So the first game I want to talk about is Final Fantasy VII. I will talk about the pronunciation of the Aerith versus Aerith debate a bit later, but for now I'm just going to use Aerith, so I hope you don't mind. But I'm going to talk about the Aerith's iconic death scene, because that was something that really shocked a lot of people when it first happened. Like the idea that you would just kill off a party member that you can actually use and have her never be able to be used again was just unheard of, and a lot of people didn't actually believe it. That the reason it happened, they didn't believe it was like permanent, but I'll get onto that in a bit. The reason it actually happened in the first place was because the producer of the games, Hironobu Sakaguchi, his mother had tragically passed away while the game was in development, and he wanted to make a game which had a theme of characters coping with death and loss and moving on, which had never really been done before. Most games didn't actually have. In most games, the only things that really died were the enemies, and no one really ever mourned their loss. The whole thing about a main character dying was never really explored until then. Now it's kind of a common thing. You have other characters who die in video games, maybe even player characters. Persona 3 comes to mind, but I won't say any more about that. Any spoilers now, do we? Yes, Final Fantasy VII, Aerith's death. So a lot of people didn't believe it, and a lot of people actually thought that there was a way to bring her back. And this gave rise to one of the most prevalent, well, I say one of the most prevalent, probably the second most prevalent after how to catch Mew in the first generation of Pokemon games. The most prevalent rumour in video game history, ways to bring Aerith back in Final Fantasy VII. Now, a lot of people cited the fact that if you put her back into your party using a cheat device, she actually has dialogue, and they cited that as, oh look, she has dialogue for the parts after she's died, that means there must be some way to bring her back. The reality of that was that the developers deliberately put in dialogue for Aerith, Kid Cloud and Sephiroth, who all can be added into your party via the use of cheat devices, for those parts of the game where all your party members are scattered around and you can talk to each individual one of them and they all say something different. And they did that to avoid the game crashing when it tried to load non-existent data. In the normal conversations, they still talk about Aerith as if she's not there anymore, even when she's standing right there, and they still make reference to her being dead. So it's pretty clear from the story perspective that she's still gone, even though in the gameplay perspective she's still there. And now I'm going to try to do what I did before, and my Firefox crashed when I opened this new tab, so fingers crossed it won't happen again. But I have the Urban Legend of Zelda TV Tropes webpage, which deals with all these kind of video game rumours. I'm just going to read some of the ones that talk about how to bring Aerith back in Final Fantasy VII. Okay, good, still not freezing up. That's good. Final Fantasy 4, 5, 6, 7. Here we go. Yep. The use of the relatively useless underwater materia, which had served no purpose in the Japanese version and only removed the time limit during an optional boss fight in the other releases. It was said that if the materia AP was maxed, something in itself that would take months of level grinding, you could travel underwater in the Forbidden City where she bit it and bring her back to life. It turns out that maxing the AP of the materia just set it back to 0. So, months of level grinding wasted there. Another materia which is reachable after she dies, which says you hear voices upon activating, making it seem like she did special things with the white materia. I'm not really sure about that one. Another rumour is being very nice to her in all of your dialogue options while being downright cruel to Tifa. It was rumoured that doing so would make Tifa die instead during the infamous scene, which wouldn't really make much sense in terms of the story, but whatever. It was also rumoured that doing the reverse, i.e. being really mean to Aerith but being really nice to Tifa, would make Tifa die instead. So the whole reason it's quite silly is because Aerith had to die, because if she hadn't died then the story wouldn't have happened. In the end of Final Fantasy VII, Aerith is basically the one that saves the day. When she dies, she returns to the life stream, and then she takes control of the life stream in the end and uses it to stop Meteor and Holy from destroying the planet. So if she hadn't died, she wouldn't have been able to do that, and the ending of Final Fantasy would have been a lot less happy. Let's put it that way. Okay, more facts. Early character designs. Cloud's iconic spiky yellow hair is probably one of the best known features of him right now, but in his initial character design his hair was actually slicked back and black, in contrast to Sephiroth's, whose hair is white and free-flowing. Another interesting little tidbit about Sephiroth is that according to a file in Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, Sephiroth has to use a whole bottle of conditioner every time he washes his hair. I thought that was pretty funny. But yeah, I'm not sure why they changed it to yellow and blonde and spiky instead of black and slick back, but the early design for Cloud was actually used for the design of Angeal in Crisis Core. He has the black slicked back hair like Cloud was supposed to have, and Zack kind of the same because he has black and spiky-ish hair. Zack, or Zax as they pronounce it in Japanese, I don't know why. Tida or whatever had the same thing in Final Fantasy X. In early beta trailers of the game, his hair was shown as black as opposed to blonde. I think they changed it to blonde in his case to more emphasize his connection to the sun, because Tida, as they pronounce it in Japan, is the name of an Okinawan sun god, as contrast to Yuna, whose name is the Okinawan dialect word for moon. And that's why they have the sun crest and the sun sigil, and the moon crest and the moon sigil, respectively. Right, Aeris versus Aerith. This debate, which still rages on to this day over whether the character is supposed to be called Aeris or Aerith. Squaresoft has repeatedly stated that her name was always supposed to be Aerith. People saying, oh, she was originally called Aeris, but they changed it in the games, are missing the point that they gave her the name originally because they wanted a name that sounded phonetically similar to Earth, as sort of a counterpart to Cloud. And early sketches of the character have her name written in English letters as Aerith, E-R-I-T-H. The reason they mistranslated it as Aerith was because it was written in Japanese characters, and there is no th character in Japanese, so they use Su. So her name would be written as Aerisu, and that got mistranslated as Aeris, which is also a Latin word, incidentally, but that would have been pronounced Iris, not Aeris, which is a completely different name entirely. And the fact that she's called Aerith in every single other thing she's ever appeared in, apart from the original Final Fantasy VII, kind of makes it pretty clear that it is supposed to be Aerith rather than Aeris. But I wouldn't recommend getting too deeply involved with any discussion in this in the future, because there's still quite a lot of people who vehemently insist that her name is Aeris, and that Aerith sounds stupid and wrong and sounds like she has a lisp, which I don't think it does unless you really exaggerate the pronunciation of it. Another debate which you might get into is how to pronounce the name of the main character of Final Fantasy X, especially since his name is never actually spoken in dialogue, despite the game having voice acting, because he is the only character whose name you can actually change. All others have their names preset, so they can be spoken in dialogue without too much problems, but because he's the main character, everyone always refers to him as he or him or that guy, and they never actually say his name. which means, of course, that no one knows how to pronounce it, and most people go by the normal English rules, I don't know, of pronouncing it Tidus, thinking or rationalizing that it has something to do with tides, because he is an accomplished blitzball player and swimmer, and blitzball is a sport which you play underwater, and he also has a lot of water themes to his character. His Brotherhood sword, which Waka gives him after it gets enhanced by Chapu in the far plane, gains the water strike element, or element attribute rather, which does water damage whenever it attacks an enemy. And he has a lot of, just basically he has a lot to do with water, so a lot of people thought it would be Tidus, like tides. Or unfortunately that's not true. Like I said, his name is written and pronounced in Japanese like Tida, T-I-D-A, and it is the Okinawan dialect word for sun, Okinawa being a region of Japan where they speak quite a different form of Japanese to the rest of Japan, so much so that it can almost be construed as a foreign language, a different language to Japanese. And his name can actually be seen written in the Lucca Stadium lockers in the Spearin script, but if you transliterate it back to English it reads Tida, as T-I-D-U, like Tidus but with no S. James Arnold Taylor, who voices Tida in Final Fantasy, well, everything he's ever appeared in basically, has said that Tidus is an acceptable English pronunciation, and that's how it's pronounced in Kingdom Hearts by Waka, not by Tidus himself. Selfie in Final Fantasy II says Tidus. So really, Tidus is probably the correct, Tida is the correct pronunciation, Tidus is the acceptable alternative, and Tidus is just wrong. And in the city of Final Fantasy, everyone says Tidus. All the characters say Tidus in that game. So we say Tida in Japanese, Tidus in English. A lot of other characters' pronunciations in Final Fantasy X changed as well. Like Riku was originally Ryuku in Japanese. I guess they changed it because they thought that Ryu sound would be kind of hard for the English voice actors to consistently do. And Auron was Aaron in Japanese phonetics. Let's see. I actually thought of a lot of stuff to talk about earlier, but I'm having trouble remembering what it was now. We talked about the character designs, talked about the pronunciation of names, heir to death, yada yada yada. Oh, did I talk about this in my Kingdom Hearts video? I can't remember now, but there was this kind of overlap with Final Fantasy, so I'll mention it now anyway. If I did already mention it in the Kingdom Hearts video, then I apologise. But there was Cloud's design in Final Fantasy, in Kingdom Hearts rather, took a lot of cues from Vincent Valentine, another Final Fantasy VII character, and this gave rise to a lot of rumours that it was originally supposed to be Vincent in the game, but it was replaced with Cloud because Cloud is more popular and therefore more recognisable as the main character of Final Fantasy VII. This actually is not true. It was always intended to be Cloud there. Tetsuya Nomura, who made the game, only said that he would have liked to put Vincent in the game, not that there were actually any plans to. The reason Cloud borrowed so heavily from Vincent's design is because Cloud is using the power of darkness in the first Kingdom Hearts game, and Nomura wanted him to look a bit more demonic as a reflection of that, and because Vincent is already very demonic looking, that Nomura just thought, okay, I'll use his design then. And there you have it. The one that actually was meant to be replaced with another Final Fantasy character was Riku, who was meant to be replaced with Yuffie, and I think I actually did mention this before, but whatever. They thought it would be confusing to have the boy Riku, the friend of Sora, and who turns evil and then turns good again, and the girl Riku, the Final Fantasy character, because the difference is only in the number of letters in their name. So they scrapped Riku and put Yuffie in her place instead, and gave Yuffie the outfit Riku was supposed to have worn. Riku did appear in Kingdom Hearts 2, but has a very minor role, and her name is never spoken in dialogue, only ever mentioned in Jiminy's journal. Okay, what else? Final Fantasy IX has a lot, and I mean a lot, of references to the previous Final Fantasy games, and as long as my Firefox continues to cooperate with me, I'm just going to bring up the page so I can talk about a few of them. I know I normally say I don't have a script, but in this case I think I really need a script because I cannot talk about these things from memory without getting all tangled up and forgetting things or misremembering things. So I think it's either on trivia or it'll be on its own page. Yeah, here we go. So the game has so many mythology gags and shoutouts, most of which were unfortunately lost in mistranslation, because the katakana spelling can be interpreted a bunch of different ways and they always pick the wrong way, although according to them that was deliberate. Not sure about that, but anyway, let's go. Mount Gulug is a mistranslation of Gurgu Volcano from the original Final Fantasy. It's actually implied to be the same place. A lot of the locations in Final Fantasy IX are actually taken from the first Final Fantasy. The Ice Cavern is another place that existed in the original Final Fantasy, and Gurgu Volcano, which is also called Mount Gulg, G-U-L-G, in some early editions of FF1, is implied to be the same place in both games, possibly at different times, but who knows. Castle Pandemonium is a reference to the final dungeon of Final Fantasy II, also named Pandemonium, and it even has the same theme music, albeit with pipe organs and at half the tempo of the original. The Eidolon, or Eidolon as they say in Final Fantasy XIII, Medine, is a mistranslation of Medine, which is spelled Maduin but pronounced Medine, a reference to an Esper of the same name from Final Fantasy VI. Its attack was supposed to be terraforming, but was mistranslated as terrahoming. If you're wondering how that could possibly happen, it's because there's no ho katakana in Japanese. They're picky about katakana like that, so they use fo instead. So terra. No, actually it's the other way around. There's no fo, so they use ho. Or one way or the other. I forget which, but it's terra bomingu or terrahomingu, etc. It should be terraforming, but they rendered it as terrahoming instead. Terraforming, by the way, if you don't know, it's the hypothetical process whereby a planet actually alters its own atmosphere and things like that in order to make it more Earth-like and therefore more habitable. Nothing to do with the attack, but it's just a cool name. Every passenger car in Lindblum is numbered 8. Final Fantasy VIII. There you go. The Cry of the Dwarves, Rally Ho, is a mistranslation of Lally Ho, the Cry of the Dwarves in Final Fantasy IV. If you examine a sword that looks remarkably similar to the Buster Sword, Cloud's main weapon, in the weapon shop in Lindblum, Zidane, I should talk about that name actually, but I'll do that in a bit. Zidane will remark, I remember a guy with spiky hair who carried something like this, referencing Cloud from Final Fantasy VII. Actually, it could also be referencing Zack, because Zack was and Gilles technically was the original owner of the Buster Sword. That Zack had it before Cloud did, and Zack also has spiky hair, so it could be either referencing Zack or Cloud, really. Oh, one of Zidane's lines towards the end of the game is "No cloud nor squall shall hinder us," obviously referencing Cloud Strife and Squall Leonhardt, the protagonists of Final Fantasy VII and VIII, respectively. A side quest reveals that Princess Garnet's real name is Sarah, the same as the princess from the original Final Fantasy I. If you examine the grandfather clock in Kwan's dwelling, you are told that there is nothing inside. This is a reference to Final Fantasy VI, where there would be an elixir in every grandfather clock in the game. This is the only place in Final Fantasy IX where there is a grandfather clock you can examine, so it was likely an intentional reference. And of course the original Final Fantasy I also featured a villain named Garland. When Princess Garnet is first encountered, she wears a robe like that worn by the White Mage in the original Final Fantasy I. The world map bears a striking resemblance to the world map in Final Fantasy as well. The show within a show play I Want to Be Your Canary features a character named Princess Cornelia, a reference to Corneria, which is renamed Cornelia in later translations from the original game. Since her father is named King Leo, this is also a reference to King Lear, which is not Final Fantasy, it's Shakespeare. The 4 elemental fiends fought in Memoria originally appeared in the first Final Fantasy, though Marilith's name is mistranslated as Malaris in Final Fantasy IX. This fiend was called Kari, or Kari or whatever, in the NES version of Final Fantasy, though later translations use the name Marilith. Kari is also a mistranslation, incidentally, as it's supposed to be Kali, the Hindu goddess. Freya can find a weapon named Kain's Lance, referencing Kain Highwind from Final Fantasy IV. They were both dragoons, and they are both spear users. In one scene in Black Mage Village, a couple of Black Mages are talking about naming a chocobo Bobby Corwin. The first syllables of those 2 words, Boko, refer to Bartz's chocobo from Final Fantasy V, whose name was actually spelled with a K, but whatever, it sounded the same. The final boss, Necron, uses an attack called Grand Cross, the same name as an attack Exdeath uses in Final Fantasy V. Nova Dragon is an alternate translation of Shinryu, a bonus boss from Final Fantasy V. Shin can mean both holy and new in Japanese, with Latin for new as Nova, and Ryu means dragon. The limit break in this game is called Trance, which first appeared in Final Fantasy VI as one of Terra's skills after she unlocks her Esper power. It was translated as Morph in the original Super Nintendo version of Final Fantasy VI. An NPC named Locke appears in Lindblum, Locke being a character from Final Fantasy VI. He's not a thief, he's a treasure hunter. And of course Eiko's Moogle friend is named Mog, who also appeared in Final Fantasy VI. After the Prima Vista crashes in the Evil Forest, the Tantalus Band play Rufus's Welcoming March from Final Fantasy VII in an active time event. A little girl NPC in Lindblum is called Alina, another Final Fantasy VII character. She was a member of the Turks. One of Steiner's abilities is called Climb Hazard, the same as one of Cloud's limit breaks in Final Fantasy VII. Incidentally, this is yet another mistranslation. It was supposed to be Climb Hazard, C-L-I-M-B space Hazard, because Cloud jumps high into the air and then comes down with his sword on the enemy. So it's meant to be a slightly English way of saying, Englishy ways of saying that it's fatal to things that are high up. The Final Fantasy IX kept the mistranslation to maintain the reference. Similarly, his strongest sword tech is called Shock, which was Leo's special ability back in Final Fantasy VI. Calling chocobos via chocobo footprints on the world map was first done in Final Fantasy VII. Amarant has a move called No Mercy, a reference to one of Cypher's limit breaks in Final Fantasy VIII. Zidane's ultimate weapon is called Ultima Weapon, which is a recurring weapon in the series. It's also known as the Atma weapon in the SNES translation of Final Fantasy VI, which was again a mistranslation, because it's Arutema in Katakana, and somehow they got Atma from that. I'm not sure how. You can't. It might have also been due to space limitations. Final Fantasy X-2 actually makes a reference to that, where in the description for the Ultima Weapon enemy, it says, whatever you do, don't call it Atma. Ultima and Omega, or Ultima Weapon and Omega Weapon, so I diverge from the topic right now, have been recurring either boss fights, weapons, or both in every Final Fantasy game since the beginning. Warmech, who was originally named Omega in Japanese and actually got renamed Omega in later versions of the original Final Fantasy, is a extremely powerful optional random encounter. It's not even the boss, it's more like just an optional random encounter that can be found in the final dungeon. Final Fantasy 6 has, like I said, Ultima Weapon. 7 has both an enemy and a sword called Ultima Weapon. The weapon, or the enemy called Ultima Weapon, drops the sword called Ultima Weapon, which is the strongest weapon for Cloud. Zidane has the Ultima Weapon in Final Fantasy IX. There's Ultima and Omega, who are optional bosses in Final Fantasy X. Omega Weapon appears again in FF12 and 13, I think, no, 13.2 as an optional boss fight in the Colosseum, which is implied to be the actual one from the original game, Final Fantasy 1, because it's the big giant war machine, and let's continue with this. 3 of the attacks that Carbuncle can use, Ruby Light, Emerald Light, and Diamond Light, refer to Ruby Weapon, Emerald Weapon, and Diamond Weapon from Final Fantasy VII. Could be a coincidence, but one of the SFX moves during the stage fight at the beginning of the game, the flashy moves that do no damage, is called Meteo, which could refer to how the spell Meteor was shortened to Meteo in the SNES version of Final Fantasy VI. Yeah, let's talk about Zidane's name, actually, because that's yet another, you guessed it, mistranslation caused by incorrect reading of the katakana. His name, which is written as Jitan in Japanese, was actually supposed to be Gitan, which is spelled Gitan and is French for gypsy, fitting as his last name is tribal, which means basically tribal gypsy, you know. They mistranslated it as Zidane, which is a Brazilian name and the name of a famous Brazilian soccer player, because the katakana G, which is very complicated in issue in Japanese pronunciation, can be used as a substitute for the sound Z, which doesn't actually officially exist in Japanese, even though there is a katakana which is often romanized as Z, but it would be pronounced as G. So that's why, for instance, well, I can't think of any specific examples right now, but to cut long story short, the G sound can be substituted for either G, D, or Z, two of which there are actually 2 separate kana for in the katakana alphabet, but which are both pronounced G. I think the difference being that one is pronounced with a hard, like G, and one is pronounced like more like a G, like a soft sound. But yeah, it's supposed to be Gitan or Gitan, not Zidane. And yeah, Sabin in Final Fantasy VI was supposed to be called Mashias in the original. His name was changed because of space limitations, I believe. His nickname was Mash in Japanese, so I'm not sure if it's supposed to be Sabin or Saban or whatever, because there is no katakana spelling for that name, is only Mashiasu for his Japanese name, Mashias or Masias if you prefer, because she can be either C or she in Japanese phonetics. I'm going to talk more about name changes because I just thought of some more stuff to talk about. Woohoo! So I guess you're stuck with me for a bit longer. Okay, a lot of people know this already, but Terra Branford, the main character of Final Fantasy VI, was originally named Tina in Japanese. The Japanese developers wanted a name that would sound foreign and exotic. Of course, the name Tina doesn't really sound very foreign and exotic to us, even though it does to them. So when the game was moved over here, she was renamed Terra to keep the whole air of mystery or whatever about her. And I looked at Final Fantasy trivia for Final Fantasy in general. Oh yeah, I can talk about how the game series originally came to be, because the whole idea started when Hironobu Sakaguchi's company, which was at that time called Squaresoft, it renamed to Square and then to Square Enix or whatever, Square Enix, was on the verge of bankruptcy, and he was really desperate to do something to bring it out of this. Well, he was kind of more like resigned to his fate. He had one last chance to make a game, and if it didn't work, he was going to have to go back to college and repeat a year and be surrounded by people he didn't know. So he thought to himself, okay, look, I'm pretty doomed right now. I'm just gonna make one. I'm just gonna make one final game, and it's gonna be a fantasy game. I want to tell a story, and I'm gonna call it Final Fantasy. That's where the title came from, and everyone knows the story. It was a major success. It shot him straight out of bankruptcy, and Square Enix right now are one of the top game developers or whatever in the world. So safe, I think, is what you can say for that. And that's why it's called Final Fantasy, because people think, why is it called Final Fantasy if there are so many sequels? It was called Final Fantasy because he thought it would be his final game. Yoshitaka Amano has stated that he's the main character designer, by the way, has stated that of all characters he has drawn for Final Fantasy, Terra Branford from Final Fantasy VI is his favourite. You can see why. She is quite pretty. Hironobu Sakaguchi considers 9 the best title in the series, and so do I. The game actually received mixed reactions and sold the least copies of all the PlayStation 1 installments of the franchise. So yeah, it's quite polarizing, really. I think it's best if you've actually played the previous game, so then you can understand all the references, and you're like, oh man, I remember the Ice Cavern, that's from Final Fantasy 1. Oh, Dorga's artifact is Dorga, like Une and Une, because they were characters in Final Fantasy 3. And these all weren't on the mythology guide page, by the way. There's so much more than what I just read off there. Like Dorga and Une's artifacts, the magical fingertip, which references Go-Go in its item description, Go-Go being a character of Final Fantasy V. The rat tail was an item from Final Fantasy 1. Matoya is referenced in the descriptions for the beautiful, strange and unusual potions. I'm just doing this from memory, sorry, right now. The first part, this is actually quite clever, and I was like, oh well, when I first discovered this. The first time you get a full party of 4 members in Final Fantasy IX, you have Zidane, Steiner, Vivi and Garnet, or Dagger as she's called there. In other words, Thief, Fighter, White Mage and Black Mage, the default starting party in Final Fantasy 1. Which I thought was pretty cool. Also, Vivi looks like a Black Mage, Freya's design is modelled after a Red Mage. All the characters actually behave like a specific class in Final Fantasy. Zidane is a Thief, Vivi is a Black Mage, obviously, Steiner is a Fighter, Garnet is a White Mage Summoner hybrid with slightly more emphasis on the Summoner. Amarant is a cross between a Monk and a Ninja. Freya is a Dragoon, even though she looks like a Red Mage, she actually behaves more like a Dragoon or a Dragon Knight. Eiko is a White Mage Summoner hybrid with more of a focus on White Mage. And Quina is a Blue Mage, of course. According to, yeah, this is a thing that's sort of been confirmed and denied by various members of Square Enix, whatever. According to Kazuhige Nojima, albeit in a way, I don't know who that is, by the way, I'm sorry, albeit in a way that he could deny it if needed, Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy VII are connected. They apparently take place in the same universe and on the same timeline, which is not usually the case for Final Fantasy games. A side quest of Final Fantasy X-2 has Shinra, the character, talking about the possibilities of harvesting the energies of the Far Plane, the place where people go when they die, but lament that the technology would not be around for at least 300 years to do so. In the X-2 guide, the official guide, it is stated that Square had always planned on having the worlds interconnected somehow, and that X-2 is a huge hint that after space travel is up and running, the inhabitants of the world would travel to the far distant world of Gaia, FF7's world and find the life stream where 1,000 years later the descendants of Shinra found the Shinra Electric Company and set off the events of Final Fantasy VII. So there you go. So everything is connected. And let me check more sites. I know there's so much more I can say about these. Well, there's tons of things you can say about Final Fantasy, because it's just such a huge series and it's got so many games and stuff. So you see, Final Fantasy is really more or less what the game, not the series, Final Fantasy 1 specifically. It was more or less an unlicensed Dungeons and Dragons product. Virtually the entire bestiary, all the enemies in the game, is lifted from first edition AD&D, most infamously including the fact that the enemy called I, was originally a beholder, and someone at Nintendo was sharp enough to change it so that TSR, the company that makes Dungeons and Dragons, wouldn't sue for use of an assiduously guarded part of the D&D IP. Almost all of the classes are taken right from the D&D class list, with the exception of the Red Mage, and with the White Mage losing a cleric's heavy armor for balance purposes, though the Red Mage may have origins in Dragonlance. The spell system and list is lifted almost entirely, with only a bit of redesign on the top end to deal with the missing 9th spell level. And even then, even substantial parts of the combat are taken: simultaneous initiative rolls, multiple hits per attack action, attacks landing on a dead target deliberately because you have to designate targets ahead of initiative, etc. And that's another thing I'm glad that they they did away with. Let me just take a few minutes to rant about that, because I cannot play Final Fantasy 1 because of this problem that you have to, when you the battles in Final Fantasy 1 work that you select the commands for every single member of your party, and then they all get executed all at once. So you have, let's say you have 4 members of your party, 3 enemies. You have the first guy in later games, Final Fantasy games, if you happen to select a target for your party member to attack, which would die before your party member got a chance to attack that target, your party member would switch to a different target automatically, that ensuring that their turn wasn't wasted. Not so with Final Fantasy 1. In Final Fantasy 1, if your target happens to die before your party member gets a chance to attack it, that person will just skip their turn, which kind of got really annoying after a while, because either you attack them down the row like that, like you have this guy attack that guy, this guy attack that guy, this guy attack that guy, and this guy, what the hell do you do with this guy? Yeah, so you see the problem. People walking around, it's making me nervous. It's on your bike. This is the danger of doing the show live. So yeah, I'm glad that Final Fantasy 1, that was the only door. I'm just going to leave that. Someone else is going to use that. Yeah, actually I guess I better end this, because I think people stopped watching like half an hour ago. So take care, love and peace, see you next time.